This week, and I believe that it is timely, we are going to be covering stress and health psychology. What is the impact of stress on your health? What does stress do to us? Why do we get stressed? Is that a biological process? How do we deal with stress? We always go over the enduring issues. The first is person and situation. To what extent do the methods that people use in coping with stress depend on the environment in which they find themselves? So depicted on your screen is a stockbroker, and I've only seen um, movie screens where it tends to be that there's a lot of energy within that environment. Now, maybe that's not the case in real life. I don't know. I'm not a stockbroker. But is the gentleman on your screen that's facing us, is he stressed because of the situation that he's in? And does the method he uses to deal with that stress, is it dependent on which situation he's in? If he's fighting with his girlfriends about money, is that going to look different than how he deals with the stress of his job? Diversity versus universality. To what extent do people respond differently to severe stress? If you and I were both going through a divorce, we're not married to each other, we're both going through a divorce. Am I going to react like the lady on the screen that's joyful, or am I going to look down? That's a severe stress, yeah? That's a major event. How are we going to be different? If we all it would be terrible if we all went through a natural disaster. How would our responses be different? Finally, mind versus body. Can psychological stress cause physical illness? To what extent does the psychological stress, cause the biological reaction? Nature and nurture and stability versus change both could be asked in this. Those questions could be addressed. Those enduring issues could be addressed, but they are not in your text, so I won't go over them. What are some sources? Stressor is any environmental demand that creates a state of tension or threat. That's the stress. A stressor is what causes it. So what's the environmental demand? That's a stressor. Know that term. A stress is that tension or threat. So we're going to talk about fight or flight. It's that threat. If you see a growling dog, it's the stress is your state of tension. The stressor is the dog. The adjustment is the requirement of change or adaptation. All stressful events involve change. They do. I have to do one thing or another. I'm going to have to consider what to do from there. Most people prefer order, predictability, so on and so forth. So even the fact that whatever the event is causing change could be stress in and of itself. So moving. I moved to a new house over the end of last term, the beginning of this term. We're still adjusting to that. It's a lovely stressor. It's an environmental demand. Puts pressure on us to commit an action. We had to move our stuff. We had to pack it up. We had to go through our stuff. It's a good thing, but it's stressful, and I have to change. The more change required, they say, the more stressful the situation. The newness, developing new cognitions, new schemas around what is going on in your life, having to make more efforts, having to sustain those efforts, that is more stressful. This is the college life stress inventory. In last term, I made the on-ground class do this as their worksheet for this week. However, I found that in our conversation in class that for some people the stress ratings are off, and it's very much based on a traditional quote-unquote college student, that 18 to 22-year-old, like being away from home for the first time. I doubt that applies to most of you in this course. I know we have a lot of non-traditional learners, quote unquote, which means anyone basically over the age of 22 in school. So you're probably not away from home for the first time. It may be true, but you're probably not. Attending an athletic event, that may or may not happen. It's not even true on Central Penn campus, attending a fraternity or sorority rush. These are all, there is a life stress inventory for adults that I think is more helpful. Your book covers this in more detail. I love this screen. I hate mosquitoes, and at my new house, I have a creek on my property, and there's standing water in some areas. We have some ponds, and we have mosquitoes everywhere. And I also have like a third of an acre garden that hasn't been tended for a year. So I have been trying to tend to this garden, and there's weeds, and that's a stress. I have to make efforts to change what's going on to get our house ready to clean it up. And then there's these mosquitoes, and it's stressful. And why is it stressful? Because I have to move. They bite me. I have to swat them. What happens? I feel pressure. I feel frustration. I feel conflict from actual mosquitoes. Think about little hassles in your life. Like for me, getting stuck in traffic, I consider a stressor. I consider it creates a sense of stress, that tension, that threat. It causes me to have to change. Hassles can be whatever it's true of you. That could be an argument with your roommate. That could be a phone call from your parents. For some people, that's not a hassle. That helps them deal with it. For others, that's quite a bit of a hassle. When individuals carry around a set of irrational, self-defeating beliefs that add unnecessarily to the normal stress of living, it's called self-imposed stress. And we've talked about cognitive therapists. As a cognitive therapist, I look at people's thought processes. We talk about what their negative belief systems are. And I find when I was examining my own thoughts that when I'm under stress, I like to try to figure out ways or focus on something I can manage. And it's really easy to feel like I'm in control of the conversations in my head, like playing out situations. When we talked about decision making, we talked about counterfactual thinking and that what if that we do. That's self-imposed at times. It's self-defeating. Sometimes it's irrational. Self-imposed stress is when we carry around a set of beliefs that are irrational and self-defeating that add unnecessarily to the normal stress of living. We mentioned the question of universality versus diversity. So why are people different? Well, optimism and pessimism have a lot to do with it. Let's talk about it. You're more likely to cope with stress well if you're an optimist. If you have an internal locus of control, hopefully remember that. That's where I'm driven by the thought that my hard work produces my good outcome. That hardiness, that resiliency, it's talked about in your book, that ability to bounce back from failures easily, lots of protective factors. You're a good reader, you did well in school, you just have that belief that you can do well. You're less likely to cope well with stressors. You're pessimistic, you have an external locus of control. So you were dealt a bad hand, the glass is half empty. Basically, you're already looking through the world, you're looking at the world through a negative lens, and then when you encounter stressors, it's like your thought process blows them up. It makes them bigger than they are, so you feel stress possibly more strongly. My graduate level research project was on college students and personality trait of optimism versus pessimism and who dealt better with stress. I found that my research agreed with that research, that optimists tend to deal better with stress. How do we? Direct coping is this intentional effort to change an uncomfortable situation, whereas defensive coping is ways that I convince myself through a form of self-deception that I'm not threatened or do not really want to get something that I can't have. So I can either deal with it through direct coping, like I countered a stressor, I'm experiencing stress, let's deal with it. Or defensive coping, which is whichever way I tend to go, it's the way that I hide from it. So I can either confront through direct coping, acknowledging the situation directly, and attempting to find a solution to the problem or attain the difficult goal, getting my master's. There was times where I wanted to give up. There were times where I felt overwhelmed. I was managing work plus school plus an internship, but I had to acknowledge it head on. Most of the time I did this, not always. Finding a solution to a problem, it's like having an argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend or significant other or your family member, and you sit down and you talk about it as is depicted on the screen. Compromise is deciding on a more realistic solution or goal when that ideal solution or goal is not practical. Ideally, I would love to be a full-time assistant professor of psychology somewhere, but I have a family to care for and a farm to care for, so it's not possible. So what's a more realistic solution or goal is to teach part-time to attend to my family. Withdrawal is avoiding a situation when other forms of coping are not practical. This doesn't mean that you're running and hiding. This isn't denial. We're going to talk about defensive coping. This is, I can't make it better. It's better that I walk away. If you've ever been in an argument with a hothead and you realize that there's no way that you can make it better with that individual, that they're going to continue to argue with you, you decide to walk away. That's withdrawal. And that's direct coping because you're not going to be able to resolve the argument with that individual. How can you deal with stress at college? I love this. We normally do a stress management or some kind of intervention during busy weeks of the term. It's busy. Plan ahead. Don't wait until the night before, please. Exercise, it may seem silly because you think I need to focus, I need to spend time. Why are you telling me not to do my homework? It's not that. It's about the fact that you'll actually do better if you release those endorphins. You're going to feel better about yourself. Take a study break. Again, why are we encouraging you? Why is your book? Why am I encouraging you to walk away from the work you should do? Because we tend to overfocus and our productivity reduces. If you remember the arousal theory and that you need that optimal level of arousal, both of these help with your arousal. Talk to other people, pull people into your circle, vent some of your frustrations. Maybe that a professor didn't give you the information you felt like in a timely manner. Talk to other people, get it off your chest. Meditate or use other relaxation techniques. I strongly encourage this. Take a minute, slow down your thoughts, slow down, check in with your feelings. You can take a stress reduction workshop. They're always advertised through the counseling department if we do one, so come join us. So what are these defensive mechanisms? You can thank Dr. Freud for starting this. Denial is the refusal to acknowledge a painful or threatening reality. If you've ever interacted with someone who has found out that their loved one has a terminal disease, they talk about someone being in denial. They act as if that person is going to be around for forever, even though it's acknowledged that they're not. Repression is excluding uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, and desires from consciousness. Whereas denial is this direct effort to look the other way. This is not suppression, okay? This is, I'm not going to think about this. I'm pushing this away. Freud would say that you're burying it down in your unconscious. Projection is interesting, and I see people do this a lot. I'm attributing my repressed motives, feelings, or wishes to others. So I might say my brother is lazy. My brother is so lazy, he never cleans up after himself. When in fact, I don't. Or I might say it's obvious that she doesn't like him because he's lazy. Well, it might not be about her. It might be the fact that I feel that way, but I'm not saying it out loud. Identification is an interesting one for me. It's taking on the characteristics of someone else to avoid feeling incompetent. If you remember about personality disorders, if you looked into that a little bit more, there are some personality disorders like histrionic or dependent that this seems true of that individual. I'm taking on someone else's characteristics. I don't have my own identity, so I can hide from this incompetency. Regression, I see people do all the time, and this is reverting back a stage. Reverting back to, your book says childlike, I would say reverting back to a previous stage, whether it be a 60-year-old woman acting like she's 23. It's that I'm going to slip back. It's a 6-year-old that all of a sudden starts talking like a baby. Intellectualization is thinking abstractly about stressful problems as a way to detach oneself from it. And that sounds great, but it is suppressing one's feelings. It's not allowing one to actually tune into one's feelings. It's keeping it at such a distance that you're thinking about it, you're processing it, but you're not fully acknowledging it. And a lot of times the fact that you're stressed comes out in other ways. Reaction formation, my favorite example is politicians who stand up against immorality, that make it known they're a family man or a family woman, and then it comes out that they're having or have had affairs. It's this expression of exaggerated ideas or emotions that are opposite of one's repressed beliefs or feelings. So I'm going to act like I think it's terrible that she's having an affair. I'm going to start a policy that, I don't know what the policy would be, but let's say it's known that I have a coworker who is having an affair with the boss, and I'm in HR. All of a sudden, I'm writing a policy about relationships within the office, when the truth is that my coworker and I are having an affair, a different coworker. So I'm got this exaggerated idea or emotions. I'm putting a policy into place, not saying that it's not wise as an HR manager to have that relationship policy in place, but it's coming out of the repressed feelings and that opposite reaction. Displacement, the example one normally hears is mad at your boss, so you go home and kick the dog. It's shifting this repressed motive or emotions from the original object, whatever the stressor was, you're taking it from that stressor to a substitute object. So next time your girlfriend, boyfriend, significant other, mother, friend says, "You're just so rude to me," and you know that you haven't been rude, tell them to quit displacing their stuff on you and to tell you what's really wrong. The last is redirecting repressed motives and feelings into more socially acceptable channels, like humor. Humor is a fantastic coping mechanism. It's great. It's a defensive mechanism. That's what Freud would say, but it's one that I want to drive my clients towards. How are people different? How are we different? Socioeconomic status, people in lower socioeconomic classes, meaning less education, typically more poverty, have to deal with more stress than people that are financially secure. That makes sense. If I have $10 in my bank account versus $10,000, now people with $10,000 may feel financially insecure, but the person with $10 has a lot more stress. I had a client that had money taken out of her checking account, and that money was supposed to pay the bills. It was like a check that cleared long after she had given it out. She thought that it wasn't going to clear because they hadn't cashed it as of that date. So she had already accounted for it to pay bills. She saw it as bonus money, essentially. Well, then they pulled it out. Talk about the stress that she was dealing with that day. So we tend to If we're constantly under stress, we have less effective coping because it's like we can never catch up, we can never get our breath. There's fewer resources, fewer people to go to. It's kind of interesting. Our cultural background influences the way that we deal with stress, how we cope with it. Are we going to seek help or not? Societies differ. Whether I'm going to seek help or not determines on how my society looks at seeking social support. Gender, men and women allegedly deal with stress differently. Men, it tends to be externalizing pathology, they say, psychopathology, which means substance use or aggression, just basically acting out behaviors. Where women, it tends to be internalizing psychopathology, where we tend to ruminate, we tend to like go and talk to our friends and build up the when I run to my girlfriend and I vent about something, that might be a great coping mechanism. But if I overfocus on it and create all these irrational beliefs around it, I am ruminating about it. My friend is helping me fixate on it. Women report more stress, whether that be the way we deal with it, because alcohol and aggression help a man or a woman, if engaging in that, it helps them to repress that feeling. Oftentimes, maybe women are just more, maybe when you cope with stress this way, you are just more likely to acknowledge your stress. Does it affect our health? There is a field of, it's called health psychology. What's the psychological factors with physical health and illness? There are medical social workers that I've worked with, that's more their focus as opposed to clinical disorders. That's my focus. It's acute or chronic stress that's linked to lowered immunity, poor health, makes people more vulnerable to everything from common cold to heart disease. There's an increased risk. Acute stress, we're going to talk about A, B, C, and D personality types. But I talk about it when I go into freshman seminar and talk about stress management. But headaches, digestive issues, back pain, tons of side effects of stress. There are some resources for you in the helpful website section about dealing with stress well. What's the body's response? Fight or flight is basically, we talked about it a little bit when we talked about biology. That is our biological response through our nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight part that engages when we experience and encounter a stressor. Then we experience stress because of our body's reaction, that hormone coursing through our body, and then we choose what we're going to do. Our body has all this adrenaline. We can either fight off whatever it is or we can run away, so to speak. Once that happens, then our body goes into the parasympathetic nervous system division, if you remember, and we rest and digest. And then he has Bailey's theory. It's this general adaptation syndrome where he says that he goes beyond Cannon's theory about fight or flight. He says that we react to either physical or psychological stress in these 3 stages. And the 3 stages are alarm reaction, resistance, and exhaustion. This is more information if you need it just about the fight or flight response. We've already covered that, so please use this. We talked about it in the biological basis of behavior unit. So I want to depict this general adaptation syndrome. So what happens is we have this alarm reaction. Let's say the fire truck alarm goes off. The firefighter runs to the truck. It's the body's first response to stress. It's the acknowledgement of the stressor. We have this stressor, our body experiences stress. Our body recognizes that it must fend off some kind of danger. Then the sympathetic nervous system, as is discussed in Cannon's theory of fight or flight, is increased, and the body's ready to deal with whatever the danger is. We might use direct coping or defensive coping. And then we go into this adaptation. If neither of those approaches reduces the stress. We have resistance, and this is where we start to experience physical symptoms of stress. We start to experience signs of strain. We intensify our use of whatever type of coping we're doing, either direct through confrontation, compromise, or withdrawal, or a defense mechanism. If we can reduce the stress through these efforts, we return to a more normal state. But if it becomes extreme, or it is extreme, or it's prolonged, we may turn to inappropriate coping techniques and cling to them, like I'm going to drink to forget about it, even though obviously it's not working. If you've ever worked with somebody with substance use, it's obvious they remember, but they minimize it so much, that memory. And then during this resistant stage, so we have the alarm reaction, we have the resistant stage, we're starting to feel depleted. We might become like worn down. We might actually have wear or tear for our body. And then we have exhaustion. So we're using these ineffective coping techniques. We're not getting it done. We're not bringing the stress under control. The firefighter is fighting against the fire, fighting. It kind of reminds me of those wildfires that happen sometimes in the Midwest. And it breaks my heart when somebody's injured or somebody's killed during those times after they fought so hard. But can you imagine after fighting so hard and then you go home and you know that fire is still burning? You can't bring that stress under control. And what Saley said was some people, this is in your book, lose touch with reality and show signs of a mental illness or disorder at this time. Or they might show burnout. And I would say at different times in my life, both have been true. That I have shown symptoms. I could have been diagnosed with something. I wasn't. I could have been diagnosed with something where there was times in my life where I was down. I had strong downward mood. Probably not to the point of depression, but enough to say I was sad, I was down. And then there's other times I'm just burnt out. I'm just tired. It can hurt your ability to concentrate, cause you to be irritable, procrastinate, and then have a cynical belief that nothing is worthwhile. So you might have skin or stomach problems, and your book says that people then turn to alcohol. Alcohol, drugs, overeating. What it does is it takes care of the short-term feelings, but it leads to long-term consequences health-wise. I always find it interesting when we talk about personality. Sometimes people will tell me they're like an A personality. That didn't come from a mental health professional like me. That came from a cardiologist. And it came from a cardiologist because of the effects of stress on heart disease. Type A, you're hostile, competitive, urgent, and you're constantly striving. If you're a perfectionist, if you like things done to a T, done correctly, that's type A. It's been linked to high heart rate, high blood pressure, chronic anger, and hostility. Maybe that's not true of you. Maybe you worry instead and still have physical health and health issues. And then there is type B. It's not on your screen, but those individuals tend to be more easygoing. They tend to not be that driven, ambitious that we tend to think about. And then there's also, I believe there's a C, but it's not covered in your book. And then there's D. And D is interesting because I hadn't heard of it before I taught this class. And they called it distress personality. It's characterized by depression, negative emotions, and social inhibition. And it's also been linked to high levels of the stress hormone within your body, which damages your heart and your blood vessels over time. Stress, it lowers our immune system. Perhaps you're not aware of that. I think most people are. If you're under a lot of stress, it seems like you catch everything. It's kind of interesting because then does that mean people that are stressed tend to get cancer? There's not a strong answer about that one way or the other. Health psychology is an interesting field. It's pretty fascinating. For those of you that are healthcare administration majors, it's going to impact your business because you're going to need to appeal to Americans that are overworking, overambitious, and feel safer going to a healthcare professional than a mental health professional. How do you stay healthy? I think this is one of the most important sections in this whole. How do you reduce stress? I love these balloons. Social support, oh my goodness. You don't have to go and tell everyone your problems. Seriously, you don't. That's not what it has to be. It's about saying, hey, you want to go for a bike ride? I just need a minute to get out. Religion or giving back is an interesting discussion. Your book talks about it more. But religion, it's considered, having faith in a higher power is considered a protective factor. It's interesting because it's not really based on that internal locus of control, but it's belief that the world's going to be okay. It's that positive focus. And that altruism, that giving back, that giving to other people takes your mind off yourself and onto others. Your book also talks about calming down as a way to reduce stress, and that can be through exercising. Exercise is part of a healthy lifestyle. Expressive writing is also in your book. I know that our Summerdale has a writing group that a lot of people get out stressed during that time. Relaxation training is on your screen and also in the book. And honestly, I love progressive muscle relaxation. I can't walk you through it. I can't do it. I need to be walked through. I've listened to that MP3 100 times, it feels like. But I need someone to guide me. It's a free MP3 if you're interested. I believe it's under the helpful websites link. Otherwise, email me and I'll send it to you. Your book talks about coping effectively. And what does that mean? I want you to keep in mind that people do the best they can with what they have at the time. But sometimes we need to make efforts to change. And one of those is learning to cope effectively. Your book says how you appraise events in your environment and how you appraise your ability to cope with those possibly unsettling, unpredictable events can minimize or maximize stress and its impact on your health. Proactive coping is taking steps to avoid stressful events or to minimize stressful events' impact. It means protecting your thoughts. I'm going to step outside the book, and this is my clinical experience. It's not creating situations that aren't there. When there are situations, taking in the facts, acknowledging your emotional reaction, and then coming up with a game plan if you can come up with a game plan. It's about focusing on the positive. It's about recognizing your strengths. Your book goes into this more, and I love the way it says, in many cases, you cannot change or escape stressful circumstances, but you can change the way you think about them. It's true. I think control is one of the greatest human illusions. I really do. I don't think we have a lot of control over much. I think we do. I think that comforts us to think we do, but I don't think we do. Anything could happen, and I'm not trying to stress you out, but anything could happen on the turn of a dime. And proactive or effective coping skills is acknowledging your weakness and saying, but when it does happen, I know I have these strengths to get through it. I know I have these people that love me, and it's going to be maybe not okay, but it's going to be fine. Like, my world isn't going to all crumble, but if it does, I still have these positive things. So there's the definition for you on your book. I'm not going to read it again. Positive reappraisal, finding a new meaning in a situation or finding a perspective or insight you may have overlooked to view events as being more positive. I love to do this in treatment. You broke up with that guy. That is tough stuff. So what was good about your relationship? It's tough sometimes for people to answer that, but guiding them through that, helping them acknowledge some of the good when it's possible is good stuff. That positive reappraisal helps us cope effectively. Humor, one of the best ways. My husband makes me laugh and laugh and laugh, and I'll tell you, my mood has improved immensely since we've been together. Sometimes I try to be angry at him and he'll say something funny and I just can't keep that anger. Humor truly is stress relieving and one of the most effective. You ever looking for something funny? Go on Pinterest under the humor section. What are the elements of a healthy lifestyle? Diet, exercise, avoiding high risk behaviors, those are detailed in your book, and quitting smoking. I'm not going to break down each one. It's discussed in your book. If you've come to any freshman STEM class when I have guest lecture, it's discussed there as well. Eating well, exercising, physical activity, not smoking, obviously that's part of healthy lifestyle, and not doing things that put us at risk. So for all of you thrill seekers out there, be sure to pay attention to those comments in your book. What are some sources of extreme unemployment? Since 2008, 2005, 2006, there's been many people out of work. I heard a labor statistic, today's September 9th, 2013, I heard a labor statistic this past week that there were 330,000 people that dropped out of the labor force last month. 330,000 people that decided it wasn't worth it to keep looking for a job because it hadn't worked out. That is extreme stress. Divorce and separation is a time of extreme stress. Your book goes through that in more detail. It's worth the read. Bereavement, where you've lost somebody or you're going to lose someone, extreme stress. Catastrophe, a natural disaster, and combat and other personal attacks like rape or domestic violence or being mugged. Post-traumatic stress disorder was an anxiety disorder. Now it's in its own category. And it's characterized by episodes of anxiety, sleeplessness, and nightmares. And it results because of a previous trauma. Sometimes people have daytime flashbacks as well. There's a lot in your book about it. It's not just for veterans. It's when you've been under that extreme stress and you've been traumatized. And how do you get through that? Post-traumatic growth it's a term I've never heard before. It's in your book. It's defined as positive growth that may follow an extremely stressful event. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. A lot of times when people are in a good place with things, they'll say to me, but if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't be who I am today. Who's well-adjusted? Doesn't she look at peace? Maybe that's not true. Who knows what she's feeling right then? Her facial expression, part of me, is that she's at peace. Psychologists don't agree about what's good adjustment. It's got to be within social norms, according to some. Others say they can enjoy difficulties, ambivalence of life, challenges to be overcome. Maslow, you remember self-actualized people, that well-adjusted people attempt to actualize themselves, live in a way that enhances their own growth, fulfillment, fulfill that genetic blueprint. Who knows? Are you doing well in your life? Do you feel that you're doing well? That says to me you're well-adjusted. If you want them,